All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to talk about something we all deal with every single day, but maybe don't think too much about, our hair. And believe me, it is so much more than just something to style. It's this incredibly complex biological system, just right there on your head.
So, to really get a sense of what we're dealing with, just look at this number, 100,000. That's roughly how many hair follicles are on the average person's scalp. It's not just a few strands. It's a whole microscopic city of tiny factories, and every single one has a job to do.
And that's really the big question for today, isn't it? How does this whole city even function? What keeps it all running like a well-oiled machine? And, more importantly, what happens when things start to go haywire? Well, let's dive in. Before we can even talk about what goes wrong with hair, we've got to understand what right looks like. So first up, we're going to look at the blueprint, the normal, healthy hair growth cycle. This is the foundation for absolutely everything else we're going to cover.
Okay, so the life of every single hair on your head can be broken down into 3 stages. I like to think of it like a factory's work schedule. You've got the anagen phase, that's the long, super productive day shift where the hair is actively growing, and this can last for years. Then you have catagen, which is like the quick shutdown process, only a couple of weeks. And finally, there's telogen, that's the quiet night shift, a resting period before the old hair falls out and that little factory starts all over again.
And get this, that factory schedule isn't random. It's carefully balanced across your entire scalp. At any given time, the huge majority, we're talking up to 95%, of your hair follicles are hard at work in that growth phase. Just a tiny fraction are in transition or resting. That balance is exactly why our hair feels full and healthy when everything's working correctly. This is so important to remember. Shedding hair is completely normal. It's a healthy, necessary part of this cycle. As those hairs in the resting or telogen phase finish up their shift, they fall out to make way for new ones. And the normal range for that is somewhere around 75 to 100 hairs a day. Just hang on to that number, it's our baseline. Okay, so that's the ideal. But what happens when that perfect cycle, breaks? For our next act, let's look at what happens when things go wrong and explore some of the most common issues with hair loss, which you might also hear called alopecia. Let's start with the big one, the one most of us have heard of, androgenetic alopecia, or what we usually call male or female pattern baldness. This one is all about genetics and hormones. The key thing to understand here is that the follicles don't just disappear. Instead, that anagen growth phase gets shorter and shorter and shorter, which means the hairs they produce become thinner and weaker over time. Now, this next one is a completely different beast. It's called telogen effluvium. This is not a gradual thinning process. What happens here is that some kind of major shock to your system, we're talking a serious illness, huge stress, even childbirth, can signal a massive number of your hair follicles to just stop what they're doing and all jump into that resting or telogen phase at once. So remember that baseline we talked about? 75 to 100 hairs a day? Well, with telogen effluvium, you can just throw that number out the window. People can start shedding more than 300 hairs a day. It's this really dramatic and frankly pretty alarming increase in shedding that usually kicks in a few months after whatever the trigger was. Okay, let's just pause for a second and put these two side by side because they are so different. Androgenetic alopecia is that slow, gradual thinning caused by a shrinking growth phase. Telogen effluvium, on the other hand, is a sudden, really intense shedding event caused by follicles being shocked into the resting phase. Totally different causes, totally different mechanisms. Then you've got something like alopecia areata. Now, this isn't about hormones or stress in quite the same way. This is actually an autoimmune condition, meaning the body's own immune system gets confused and mistakenly attacks the hair follicles. The classic sign is usually these very smooth, round patches of hair loss. And finally, there's a type of hair loss that's purely physical. Traction alopecia. This is literally damage caused by constant, prolonged pulling on the hair from things like super tight ponytails, braids, or extensions. The good news with this one is that if you catch it early and stop the tension, the damage is often reversible. All right, that was a lot about the problems. So now, for our final act, let's talk solutions. Let's open up the Hair Health Toolkit and see what we can actually do to take care of our hair and deal with some of these issues. First things first, let's cover the basics, the daily habits. Think of this as preventative care. For instance, using a wide-tooth comb when your hair is wet is a huge one. Why? Because water actually weakens the protein structure of your hair, making it way more likely to snap and break. So be gentle. Now, when it comes to medical treatments, especially for pattern hair loss, two big names usually pop up: Minoxidil is a topical treatment that you apply right to the scalp. It works to wake up the follicles and, really importantly, extend that anagen growth phase. Then there's finasteride, which is an oral medication for men that works by blocking the specific hormone, DHT, that's responsible for shrinking the follicles in the first place.
You know, we've spent all this time talking about losing hair. But before we finish up, I want to touch on the flip side, because that biological cycle can break in the other direction too, and lead to excessive hair growth.
And this is a really key distinction to make. Not all extra hair growth is the same thing. It really boils down to hormones. Hirsutism is very specific. It's male pattern hair growth on a woman, and it's driven by hormones called androgens. Hypertrichosis, on the other hand, is just a general increase in hair growth that isn't tied to those specific hormones.
And of course, there's a whole toolkit for managing this. You've got your temporary methods like shaving and waxing, but for longer-term solutions, it's about how you attack the problem. Things like laser and IPL use light to target the dark pigment, the melanin in the hair, but something like electrolysis is different. It uses an electrical current to go after the growth center of the follicle itself, no matter the hair color.
And that brings us to our last thought for today. After digging into the biology, the problems, and the solutions, you have to wonder, what's the real future of hair health? Is it going to be about inventing better products, discovering some groundbreaking new medicine? Or is the most powerful tool we'll ever have just a better understanding of the incredible, complex biology that's happening on our own heads every single day? Something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.